Most reporters and anchors tend to stay away from being a part of the story, but there are some instances where it's unavoidable. That's what happened to my next guest when she made history and became the story in Major League Baseball. We'll talk with her about that experience, plus what kind of preparation goes into being a reporter, host, and play-by-play announcer. Next on Sports in the Making. Thank you so much for listening to Sports in the Making, where we find out about people who work in the sports and broadcasting industry, find out what they do, and how sports comes together. I'm your host, Don Cardona. This is episode 5, and it was recorded in October of 2019. As we approach the time when pitchers and catchers report for spring training, the planning stages for the Major League Baseball season are in full swing. On this episode, I talk with one of the most pleasant people on the broadcasting side of baseball. I first met her when we were looking for a host on our Olympic-themed Countdown to Sochi show on Universal Sports Network. We ultimately hired her, and we became fast friends, as much of this industry can be. She is a mother, a 2-time Emmy Award winner, has worked with ESPN, Fox Sports West, CBS College Sports, NBC Sports, and is currently the pre- and post-game host for the Colorado Rockies on AT&T Sportsnet. In 2018, she also became the first woman to call play-by-play on a Major League Baseball telecast in the last 25 years. We'll talk about that, how more and more women are taking on leadership roles in sports broadcasting, and more as I welcome my friend Jenny Cavnar to the Sports in the Making podcast. Jenny, thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, so I did a little bit of research on you, even though I know you, because I wanted to find out how it all started for you. And I saw that Melissa Stark was a big inspiration for you. And of course, she was the ABC Sports Sidelines reporter for Monday Night Football. What about her did you see that made you tell yourself, I have to do this?
Yeah, I think it was the first time that I saw someone that looked like me, that sounded like me, that was talking about sports, which is just something I was very interested in. And just a really impressionable time in my life, too. I was in high school and starting to kind of think about colleges, think about what I wanted to do for a living. Growing up in a family full of sports and athletics constantly around our lives, I knew that I wanted that to be a part of my career choice. I just didn't really know which avenue I would take and which avenue I would go down. So I would say leading up to seeing Melissa Stark on national television, though, I really have to give credit to Marcia Neville, who was a longtime Colorado prep sports reporter for originally Channel 4 here in Denver. And I got to grow up watching her really be a female presence on television, and often got to see her live in action at the field because my dad was a high school baseball coach. So she was often around that scene. And then once I got into high school and playing sports myself, she was around and kind of built this really cool brand that when teams won a championship, when they won their school title, she would come and they'd have a big pep assembly and she'd be the one to present it. So she really built her niche on prep sports. But again, I think having watched her for a long time and then finally seeing Melissa Stark on the national stage, it kind of clicked for me that that might be an option. And honestly, I'll credit my dad because he was very naive in supporting my dream and just saying, yeah, I could see you doing that. I mean, neither of us had any clue how competitive this industry would be.
Yeah, and speaking of your dad, he is a Hall of Fame coach in the state of Colorado. So I can only imagine how much information you gathered from him, just from osmosis, including a lot of the details that could have helped you with your growth, right?
Yeah, I don't think I ever saw my upbringing, me growing up with a dad that was a coach and the talking strategy, just those conversations, those were all preparing me for my career, but I had no clue. I mean, once again, going back to seeing Melissa Stark on TV, it was, oh, she's a football reporter. And it became very clear to me just to go that direction, like, oh, I want to be a football reporter because that's what I saw. I didn't see women doing baseball. I didn't really see women doing basketball at the time of me growing up. So that wasn't my goal. My dream became so specific. It wasn't until later and a chance opportunity that I got an interview for a job with the San Diego Padres that it all came together and clicked. Like, wow, I was made to do this. This is the sport I know the best because I grew up with it, because of the conversations that we were always having in our house, and just because of the nature of my personality. I mean, I was a curious kid, and I think, I got bored pretty easily. And when we had to go to the baseball field with my dad, there's only so much sitting around and entertaining yourself you can do. So after a while, even starting at, I would say 6 or 7, we'd be there for camp and I'd be trying to like, play in the dirt or, we didn't have cell phones back then. So I was jump roping up and down and, doing all this stuff till finally I was like, Dad, just give me a glove. Like, I want to play. I'll play with all these boys that are at your camp. I don't even care. No one's going to want me here. But like, I just wanted to get involved. And then,
Right.
that led to obviously all the games we watched growing up. And rather than just passively watching, my curiosity got the best of me. And I would ask my dad after a game, like, why did you bunt that guy there? Like, why didn't you call a hit and run? Why didn't you do this? And so there was a lot of peppering on my part at the dinner table after games. And again, little did I know that that was exactly what I'd be doing and getting paid for it for a career later on.
Well, I think that's important because, people who work in the television industry almost have to have that natural sense of curiosity. And I learn
Definitely.
something from my colleagues all the time. And I think that's from having that sense of curiosity, just finding out what they've done, the impact that they've made, how they
Yeah.
can impact millions of viewers, things like that. And so I want to find out, where did you go to college and then how did you break into this industry?
I think for me, again, back to the decision of college and what that meant, I tell people that are in college now or that are, in high school looking at colleges, I'm like, I'm so jealous of the amount of information you have on the internet to like look up schools. Like, I was the nerd that was in our career counselor's office, like every lunch break, like looking through the physical panels. Like, I couldn't wait for the mail to come to see which schools might be interested in having me as a student or having me as an athlete at their school. And so I really enjoyed that process of just kind of learning about colleges and all they had to offer. And I felt like I was a pretty well rounded high school student. I liked to be involved in a lot, I played a lot of sports. So I knew I wanted my college career to reflect that. And again, just by circumstance, I chose Colorado State University. I was dead set that I was leaving the state. I was going to go out of state. I was going to have my big adventure, my big time to leave home. And I had all these schools that accepted me, and it came down to like the last day, and I'm like, oh, I think I'm gonna go to CSU. It just came out. I'm like, I don't even know why I'm choosing this. But again, I'm so glad it happened because I was able to stay an athlete. I played lacrosse in college at Colorado State, and we were just a club sport at the time. So, we didn't have that commitment of having a scholarship, but we still had that commitment of being on a team and showing up to workouts and practices and getting to travel to play other schools and to compete for something. So that was a big part of my college experience. And then I was accepted into the business school, which I just thought was the route I should take. But as I got into it, I'm like, well, if I do want to be on TV, I probably need to pursue journalism or communication or something to that effect. So I ended up double majoring in marketing and then communication school in media studies. And my best education ended up being internships. And I really credit my brother, who's 2 years older, and he was at Pepperdine in pursuit of, his own collegiate experience. And I remember he called me as I was going into that first summer and he's like, where are you going to intern this year? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, it's my first summer break. I'm going to go to the pool. I'm going to hang out. And he found something on his college campus for Fox in LA. And I thought it was for Fox Sports. And I'm like, oh, this would be cool. And, we have family in Los Angeles. I could live with them and, do this internship. So I ended up getting the internship, but it was not with Fox Sports. It was close to Fox Sports on the Fox lot in Los Angeles, but it was actually with the creative department for movies and television series. So I ended up working for this guy who's literally just reading scripts all day long and taking important meetings with people that are trying to pitch new show ideas. It had nothing to do with sports or anything I wanted, but it was such a cool experience for me to see the television and movie landscape on that big of a scale and how people really got a show in the mix. And I think that definitely came into play later in my life because I saw the confidence that these people had to have coming in, really believing in their product, believing in their show idea, and having to put it together and pitch it. And literally, sometimes you had like 20 seconds to get your idea out, or sometimes, they'd have these elaborate meetings. But getting to see that whole process come into play. And really, it was the first time, too, for me that I told my boss, Zig Guthier, who was, running this creative development department at Fox. He asked me finally, what I wanted to do for a living. And I told him I wanted to be a sportscaster. I wanted to be a sideline reporter. And he laughed at me. Like, he laughed in my face. and was like, well, good luck with that. That's going to be hard. And it was so heartbreaking.
Was that coming from a place of women don't belong there, or because it's just a hard industry to be in?
You know, I think it was double fold. I think part of it was it's a hard industry to be in, and I think part of it because the follow-up that he had was like, "Well, what do you even know about sports?" And that kinda opened this door that then over the course of the next, like, several weeks of my internship, like, I got to show him I was an avid sports fan and kind of display some of my knowledge to where I think I won him over, and honestly, he and I are still in touch to this day, and we caught up, a couple years ago, and just over drinks, he, like, told me, he's like, "I'm really proud of you, like, you made something out of this that I didn't think was there." And it's cool to hear that because I think it developed this chip on my shoulder that you need in this industry of you're going to get no's a lot. And I think as a woman, especially in our industry and the level that I've gotten to, you're going to get laughed at a lot just because people have preconceived notions or, how they grew up or when there's not a lot of women voices on television. There are way more now. But when I was starting, there really wasn't a lot. And there definitely wasn't any female voices calling games of a major league variety. So I think for me, it was a good moment to just grow some thick skin and realize a lot of people are going to tell you no. A lot of people might laugh at you. But if you really know what you want to do and you really have a passion for it, you just have to stay the course and someone's going to eventually say yes to you. And it's going to be the best yes of your life. And then what you do with after that yes is all on you. But I learned that in that moment, in that internship. That was the most valuable thing I took. And so, because my brother made me do this internship, I went back with this new sense of urgency in my sophomore year of college. And that's when I picked up my second major. And that's when I said, I need to get more involved with campus media. I need to be doing this. I need to be perfecting this craft that I want to do for a living. So I worked on campus television. I got a job with the radio station in town, doing anything and everything. I was just their intern. I was in the marketing department making stickers for college game day. I was doing whatever they needed. And finally, they gave me the chance to go on air and do some stuff during Colorado State football games on the radio side. I got to interview one parent a game of a football player. And I think they just saw that my willingness, and that's why they gave me the opportunity to do that. And it led to another internship at 9 News locally in Denver, the NBC local affiliate. I did that one summer, and my final summer between junior and senior year, I moved to Kentucky and did an internship at a local TV station there and worked on campus at the University of Kentucky. I think that having those 3 internships, being one in Los Angeles, one here in Denver, and one in Kentucky, it gave me this regional perspective too of sports and how they're viewed and what's important to people. And that became such a great educational basis for me as well. And I think by the time I ended up graduating, I had this awesome, well-rounded, cool collegiate experience between the academic side and be involved in covering sports and starting my career and then just getting those reps and that repetition and building my confidence. And the cool part is they all landed together and they all were interwoven and connected me to my starting point in television. And that was my senior year. Our lacrosse championships were being televised for the very first time by a startup company called College Sports Television, CSTV. And it's what's ended up becoming what CBS Sports is now, and they were just launching. They were doing our lacrosse championships. I ended up meeting the producer who was doing them through a mentor of mine. And he saw my, get this, VHS tape of my work. And he was like, yeah, I could probably use her. Like, I won't pay her, but, if her team's not in the championship game, I could like throw her on the sidelines so she could get some practice. And it ends up, I did the men's and women's championship game sidelines. And he really liked me. They liked me. And he ended up hiring me for this show on Fox that summer. I think it was the Honda Women in Sports Award. And so he flew me to New York and I got to do these stand ups. And I'm like, wow, this is so awesome. Like, I'm getting paid to do this. This is so cool. And then I went back to New York later that summer and interviewed for CSTV in their full time sideline position. And I ended up getting it. And all of a sudden, here I am, 22 years old, straight out of college, and I landed a national television job. And, in my mind, I'm like, I made it. All that hard work paid off. I did it. Well, of course, being a startup network, they were way over budget. And I did two college football games sidelines, and then they laid me off along with like half
Uh,
of the crew. So it was definitely a 3 month period of just pure elation, thought I made it, to just pure reality. Where like, you did not make it, you're still 22, you now need to go find a job at a station that you're going to be on air more often. So it was kind of a funny first introduction to the real world.
yeah. So, what was it like the first time you had the microphone in your hand on the field? What were you told? What were you thinking? How did you deal with that?
Well, I think again, for a lot of people that watch sports and watch sports on TV, and how, especially when they see women on the sidelines of a football game, like they're fashionable and they're put together, and they look so, it looks so glamorous. I mean, a lot of people think that about TV, that it's so glamorous, and I had that quick realization that it is not glamorous. I mean,
Right.
being on TV is fun, but it was really this first idea that, oh my gosh, I've worked so hard this week, and by the end of the game, I realized like I was on camera twice for maybe a total of a minute. And all my prep work ended up being like 90% of my job. And what I prepared to talk about, or the stories I wanted to tell, maybe 20% of that, maybe 15% of that actually made air. So I realized that it's really about the journey and not the destination. We also had really bad audio. I was doing BYU at Stanford, and like my audio kept cutting out, and I didn't have an A2. I didn't have an audio person with me. So I spent half the first half of the game running around trying to find the TV truck and an engineer that could help me, and our producers like yelling at me because I'm not in talk back. And it was just like this pure chaotic moment that I realized, like, wow, I have a lot to learn about this business and about how everyone's jobs go, and about who you need the most and who you need to be, right next to you, and who you need to make your job work. So it was as thrilling as it was, and as exciting as this moment was that I'm going to finally be getting to do a college football game. There was a lot of realities behind it that I was very naive about.
Well, and I'm sure it accelerated your growth in understanding all of those additional things, knowing what a producer does, knowing how a director calls the shots, and everybody inside the truck, right?
Yeah, it really did, and I think that's something I wish I've got to spend more time with, is just sitting inside of a TV truck. I mean, that was really my first time doing a live event remote, and I didn't have a full understanding of everyone's jobs and how many people it took to put a production on. And again, like you said, they're individual tasks that all they have to do all those tasks right to come together for us to have a great production. So I realized at that point I had a lot to learn. As much as I had learned and thought I was ready for it, I had a lot to learn.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to learn in the broadcast industry. So, how did you end up getting the Padres job?
Yeah, so I had, after I had gotten, laid off from that CSTV gig, I ended up getting a job in Flint, Michigan, and moved to a small market and was there for about a year. I had an opportunity to coach lacrosse at UCLA, which took me back to Los Angeles, and it felt like the right opportunity then, and maybe I could get back into TV. So I kind of had this 4 or 5 year period where I was doing television. I loved it, but lacrosse was still a passion of mine, and I started doing that and working really in the club lacrosse scene out in LA and trying to grow the game, doing TV on the side. But something in the back just always said, like, I still really want to do TV full time. That's, I think, where I want to be. As much fun as coaching was and getting to have an impact on youth and college age kids, I knew I wanted to do TV. So I did have an agent at the time that was getting me some small jobs, and he brought this job up to me in San Diego. And first, it wasn't for the Padres. There was a local TV station in San Diego hiring. And it was really kind of my first trek from Los Angeles down the coast to see San Diego. And I was like, wow, this place is so cool. It'd be fun to work here. And, I go for this interview and I don't end up getting the job. But I think it set me up for this passion of like, I would love to stay in California if I can, and I would love to get back in TV. He called to tell me this Padres job was open, and again, I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, I don't really know what the requirements are for it, but like, I'll go down and meet this guy. And I'm interviewing with Dennis Margino, who was the executive producer of the time for the Padres and had been around San Diego for a long time. He's a really big name there, was a long time anchor at one of the local TV stations. So a lot of people had a lot of respect for him. So here I am sitting with him at PF Chang's in La Jolla, and I will never forget, I just didn't know what to expect from the interview process. And he was like, "Oh, I see you have some television experiences, but what I'm really interested in is your agent said you know a lot about baseball." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, well, my dad is a baseball coach." So we just start to talk about baseball, and he's asking me if I know how to keep score. And I was like, "Yeah, of course I know how to keep score." Like, I didn't realize, like, not everyone knows that. And so as he's asking me these questions and, we're just talking shop, I start to realize, like, oh my gosh, if I could work in baseball, this would be amazing.
Did you realize that you knew so much about the sport until you had that conversation?
It's an interesting question. I really, looking back, I don't think I did because again, it was just part of our life growing up,
Right.
and it was just part of our daily conversations. And at that point, in all honesty, it's not like I kept up with Major League Baseball. Like I remember before I was going to the interview, I remember being like, well, I should probably know, who was in the playoffs last year and who's on the Padres. And obviously I
Right. All the
recognized
headline type
all of the
stuff.
names. But yeah, I didn't, it's not like I was following the game super close at that time. But you're right. I think it was just that aha moment that, wow, like maybe I was really made to do this and prepared to do this, and I didn't even know it. So again, I still had a lot to learn, about the TV truck, about the live production, but just
Right.
such a cool place to do it. And I'm so grateful that Dennis gave me that opportunity because I've even talked to him recently and he's like, yeah, you were young and you were raw, but I knew there was something in there. And just that first person to really believe in you. Everyone needs a champion no matter what you do in life. But
Right.
I'm so grateful that my champion was him because he was tough on me. He was really tough on me. But he also knew I'd fit really well into the team and the other guys on air. And I learned so much from all of them and the veterans that we had. Matt Vasgersian was actually still calling Padres games at the time. Obviously, he's at MLB Network now. But yeah, he was the voice of the Padres with Mark Grant, who's been there forever. And they are both just pros. They're so good on TV. They're so funny. I learned so much about their style. And I think that helped. That gave me a little piece of my style on air. I think we all kind of steal from people that we trust and that we know and that we learn from. And I'm so glad I got to learn from those guys because it made a huge difference for me, I think, as I grew up.
Yeah. So who was part of your broadcast team, the producer, director, and how did they shape you as to how you've become?
Yeah, Nick Davis was the Padres producer at the time, who you've worked with along the
He
way.
is now the VP at Fox Sports Networks in LA.
Right, right. He left us to grow his career at ESPN on the East Coast and did a lot of things there. And yeah, now he's back on the West Coast, big time with Fox, as you said. And then Tom Satursky was the director, and Tom's great. He's a well-known director, obviously across our landscape. So again, just two guys that were willing to take. I'm sure looking back, like they were probably like, "Wait, what, Dennis? You hired this 24-year-old girl to like, what is she gonna do?" Like because this is all new. I mean, again, when I grew up, regional sports television wasn't a thing, right? I mean, like we
Right.
didn't really, especially growing up in Denver, we didn't have the Rockies till 93. And we definitely didn't have this huge regional production like they do now for baseball. So I would say it was pretty new to the industry still in 2007 to have a sideline reporter in game. And we didn't even use a sideline reporter in game for Padres. I mostly did reporting when I got hired for our pre and post game show and for our weekly show. And then I moved into more of hosting role for the pre and post game. Really, it wasn't till I came to Colorado in 2012 that I was doing in-game sideline reporting. It was kind of new, I think, to all of them to have someone there. And they were all so great with me. Just took so much time to help get me up to speed. They eased me in on air and I think from that standpoint, that's where I first got to know the truck a little more and the ins and outs of the truck and what those guys do every day. And again, being kind of curious in who I am, that's like the first time that I asked a lot of questions of what other people did and how they got there. And
Right.
I was so focused, I think, in college about like what it's going to take to be on air and asking questions of other people on air, not realizing the village that it takes to do television. So that was kind of my education on production.
Right. So how long were you in San Diego? It was 3 years, right?
Yeah, I was in San Diego for 5 years, actually.
Five
I was
years.
there from '07 to 2011, and imagine this, 2007, my first year with a major league broadcast team, the Padres had been pretty good throughout the course of time. They were really good that year. They had Jake Peavy, who won a Cy Young Award,
Mm-hmm.
and it came down to the end. It came down to going and playing an extra game, game 163, against the Colorado Rockies, my hometown team, to decide who's going to get in the
Was that
playoffs.
a hard one to?
It was so hard. It was so hard because I think in my mind, I remember being like, oh, like it would be so cool to do the playoffs and cover the playoffs. But I literally said this, what a jinx I was. I was like, but I'm sure there'll be more opportunities. Well, it wasn't until the Rockies went to the playoffs in 2017 that I covered my first playoff. So it took 10 years
Oh wow.
because the Padres had been so good up until that point, and then they still haven't made the playoffs since 2006. So, anyways, the Rockies, you know, that they ended up, well, big sports fans know they ended up winning that game and then going on to play in the World Series against Boston that year. So it was fun for me as a fan. But it was just this really interesting, like devil angel as I'm watching the game of like,
Yeah.
oh, it'd be so cool to professionally cover the playoffs, but like, oh, I really want the Rockies to win. So yeah, that was a fun experience for my first year. So yeah, I was there for 5 years. And again, as fate would have it, that I worked for Channel 4 San Diego. We were a local Cox Communication owned company that had the rights to the Padres. They lost the rights to the Padres that year. So we all were basically getting laid off because that was our bread and
Right.
butter, doing Padres baseball. And so we knew our time was coming to an end. We had an off-season nightly sports show that we did in San Diego, that we were going to continue in 2011 until the end of the calendar year, and then that was going to be it. So we've all already been told we're getting laid off, you know, and how the schedule is going to go. And I was lucky enough through, you know, a network and connections to hitch on to Fox Sports West. They needed a reporter for the Anaheim Ducks. And so I ended up taking that job for that hockey season of 2011, 2012. And as I was doing that on a freelance basis, there was some talk that there might be some Dodgers games available, probably like 60 Dodgers games. So I was thinking that's the route I would go, that I'd probably move back to Los Angeles, stay in California. And I worked with a great team up there at Fox Sports West. So I was excited about that. And all of a sudden, my counterpart in Colorado, who was the sideline reporter for a long time for the Rockies, Alana Rizzo, called me and she's like, "Hey, just a heads up, like I'm moving on. I'm going to go to MLB Network. I accepted this job and I know they'd hire you in a heartbeat here." I remember like sitting in my car. I'd just gotten done getting coffee or something. It was February. I was like, "Oh my gosh, well, like I'm doing this hockey job. I'm maybe taking the Dodger job. Like, going home to Colorado." Like, so
A
it just
great
threw this
problem to have.
great problem to have. It threw this wrench in the mix and ended up calling the executive producer here in Denver, Ken Miller. And Ken and I had formed a great relationship over the years because he used to be the Rockies director, you know, traveling throughout the NL West. It was really cool to kind of meet your counterparts and get to know them and how they, you know, do their
Right.
work for for the teams they're covering. So Ken and I had fostered a relationship over my 5 years in San Diego, and as soon as I called him, he's like, "Well, well, well, I have been waiting for the Denver girl to hear about this opening." So he definitely made me go through the interview process. But when they hired me, it was just such a cool opportunity to come back and be home. And at the same time, I just started a relationship in San Diego with my now husband. We were about a year into dating, so it took some convincing for the guy that surfed every day in the ocean that we had surfing here in Colorado too, just on a mountain. So to get a snowboard and move here with me. So it was just this crazy cool time professionally and personally too. And then got to come home in 2012.
At any point during this time, did you ever stop and think, am I really doing this? Or did you feel like you'd been already doing that? You mentioned it before. You felt like you were made to do this, but were there any points where you maybe had that self doubt come in, like, what the heck is going on?
Oh my God, so many times. I think early it was right when I got laid off from CSTV and I was like, why am I doing this? This business seems erratic. Like, why would I put myself through this? Like, maybe I should just go get a regular job. And I kind of did with the lacrosse world. And I think too, with once I was on air in San Diego and you're like, okay, I'm doing this in a bigger market, I'm doing it for a major league team. You know, there's some, I guess, pressure that goes with that. And yeah, some self-doubt. Like if you mess up on the air,
How bad am I
it
going to
it
get
just
yelled at?
takes yeah, yes, how bad am I gonna get yelled at? How bad was that mistake? Is that a fireable offense? Like, you just go to all these places, but at the same time, like any craft you have in life, the more you do it, the more you have confidence with it, and even when you make mistakes, the less awful they seem. Like, I'll never forget the first time making a mistake on TV, and it just felt like this was probably being on, like, college television station, right? And it just felt so enormous, right? Like,
Yeah,
you couldn't sleep that night. You messed up on TV. How could you do that? And then the more practice you get and the more you go along, you just learn how to roll over the mistakes or how to make it better next time or how to just not dwell on them because you can't, right? So
right.
yeah, there was of course those moments of doubt though, and I think too. While I was in San Diego, I couldn't recount all the places, but there, you start to grow in your job and you start to think like, well, where am I ever going to, how am I ever going to move up here in this job? So you start to kind of look elsewhere or look at national jobs or, I had an agent this whole time. So he's always bringing stuff back to me too. And you're starting to think like, oh, maybe I'll set my sights bigger and go for that job. And, maybe you put your name in the hat. And I definitely remember auditioning for other jobs while I was in San Diego and not getting them. And then, of course, the doubt comes back like, oh, am I even good enough for this? Maybe I shouldn't be thinking I can be on national television.
Right.
I think you're always, and it's such a tough lesson to learn. And I'm still learning it now as a new parent of like, just be where your feet are. Try and be exactly where you are and enjoy that and master that. And it doesn't mean you can't pursue other things or you can't look forward to the future, but like really just enjoy the time that you have because when you look back, it goes by so fast. And even though I was in San Diego for 5 years, when I came to Colorado, I missed so much about my life there that I probably didn't enjoy as much as I should have when I was there and in the moments.
Well, and that's an interesting thing you say because television is about sacrifice.
A
And when you
lot.
have your feet under you, like you said, it's sometimes difficult based on the assignment that you get as anybody working in television. So, how do you balance that and how challenging is it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel so lucky that my husband, he's such a great partner and he is such a big fan of what I do, which is so helpful. Like he wants me to be traveling for work. He wants me to be at the big game. He wants me to experience all that stuff. And so he's super supportive, which is huge for that's like you have to have that because our hours are nuts and our
Right.
travel is crazy and it's even more of a sacrifice when you add children into the mix for sure. We've just tried to take it a step at a time, and, honestly, when I got pregnant, I was like, "How is this going to work?" Like, I can't be a good mom and great at my job, and how am I gonna do all these things? And it's so
Yeah.
funny, once again, timing, because that was my first opportunity to call a Major League Baseball game. It happened the first year my son was born. He was about 6 months old, and I'm like, "There's no way. There's no way. How am I gonna do this?" And I found out the day before that I was gonna be calling a game, and you're just like I'd had 0 time to even think about it or prepare for it or
Yeah.
let my mind go to, like, "How are we gonna make all pieces work?" Like, we just had to do it, and I found that out to be true a lot. I mean, every parent I've talked to is like, "You always just make it work." And I never knew what that saying was because now that you're in it, you do somehow just always make it work. And we have a village. My mom helps out. My in-laws that are in California, sometimes we take the baby there if I have a series there and leave him with them for a week, so they get grandkid time, and we can both continue to pursue our careers. And so it's definitely crazy. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's worth it. I think when you're so passionate about what you do and when the people around you are just as passionate and supporting your dreams.
Right. Before we talk about your calling play by play, I want to talk about what you think makes a good production for any
Oh
sport. Because
yeah,
I know my philosophy on producing a game
that's a
is
that's a
to
good question.
tell the viewer something they didn't know or find things about the game that they might not have realized or, getting into the nuances without getting too technical.
Yeah, I think for me, what makes a great broadcast is the storytelling, hands down. And it's because you need to have people to root for. Sports in and of itself, if you turn a game on, can be entertaining, no doubt. If you have a big play, a big moment, but that's not in control of the production team, right? Like
Right.
you go into a game hoping you're going to get a great game, hoping you're going to have a nice score or an amazing play that decides the game. But like that's not up to us. What's up to us is how we present the game. And so for me, what we can control is that storyline and from start to finish, how you set it up and what players you're introducing and what backstories you're introducing. So you're grabbing that audience. And so they're learning something, as you mentioned, that they might not know about these athletes that all of a sudden becomes a key for them as the game's going on to root for those people. And so it's almost like this sideshow to the game for me. I mean, I think great game production depends on the sport first and foremost, but for us in baseball, storytelling becomes really important because you might have a lot of dead time, so to
There
speak,
is so
action
much
wise.
dead time in baseball.
Yes,
Yes.
it's crazy. So stories are kind of the fabric of the game in baseball. And that then to the producer and the director and the announcer, it then becomes this dance of how they're working together. What elements does the producer have on hand to support those stories? What shots is the director taking to paint the picture of these stories? And then how is that story being developed throughout the course of the game or throughout the lull of action that the announcer's having to keep the fan engaged and involved. So to me, again, I just think it's storytelling, but with that comes preparation, right? Preparation from the announcer, relationships that the announcer has with these players to get those stories, relationships between the announcer, the director, the producer, and the entire cast of the production team to make sure those stories are told right and the elements that they have to support them. So, bottom line for me, is the relationships within a production team become so evident on television. And I think any fan could say that, right? If you watch a national broadcast and you're like watching Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, they clearly have a great relationship off screen. Aaron Andrews being involved with them.
Right.
It's very obvious that those people like each other. And I think then that invites fans to be part of their story and how they're telling it and be engaged in watching it. So I think the baseline for all of that becomes the relationships, right?
Yeah. And, I get a lot of questions too, kind of playing on that, on what's the thought that goes into covering a game? What angles are you taking? From your side of it, how do you build those relationships with these athletes or front offices that allow you that access that you have?
Yeah, I think it's just time and personality and connection. I mean, I learned really early on in my career. I'll never forget. My example will be when I was in Flint, Michigan, I had to go down and do a Detroit Pistons game and get in the locker room. And again, these guys have never seen me. I've never seen them. Obviously, we'll be in a media scrum probably, but like I have to get the most quality sound that I can in the shortest amount of time and get it back and turn it around and make a good newscast. That's my goal, right? So how am I going to do that? And I remember looking at the roster and just looking up and down it at like colleges and hometowns and just trying to find my connection to them. Well, I was so lucky because Chauncey Billups was playing on the Pistons. And I thought, this is awesome. He went to high school in Denver, Colorado. And I'm just going to go up to him and say, my high school, I'm just going to go like, hey, what's up? What's up, George Washington, Smoky Hill? And he did this double take at me and looked at me. He's like, no way, you're from Colorado? And I'm like, yeah. And so then all of a sudden, like, here I am. I have this quick rapport with Chauncey Billups and I got some great sound and I can move on. And the next guy I was going to get was Tayshaun Prince, who went to the University of Kentucky. And I'm a big Kentucky basketball fan and, family connections there. So I used that with him. And that kind of became my little cheat sheet, if you will, for every town I stopped in or for every team I covered of just trying to find someone with a college connection, a hometown connection, as I read about them, maybe a hobby connection, whatever it might be, to just open the door to start having that conversation.
And that came from you?
That came from me. That just came from like something like I always was interested growing up what athletes were from Colorado. So it kind of just like, because it makes it personal for you then. So
Sure.
then as I began to cover people, I was like, oh, I can use that little cheat sheet for myself. And it's worked awesome. It's definitely worked awesome to open the door. But then I think to build upon that, when you cover a team every day, like we do on in regional sports television and what I do for baseball, it becomes just being seen, to be honest, first and foremost. Like it starts at spring training and it starts with just being around. But it's a very delicate dance of like You want to be seen, but you don't want to be annoying. You want to have a lot of conversations with these guys, but you don't want to be annoying. And so
Right. You don't want to impose yourself on them.
you don't. And I really have to learn 25 different personalities and I have to learn 25 different routines. And I have to really respect these guys in their crafts and their agendas and what they have to get done every day. And at the same time, when I build that trust with a player, the best thing that can happen is they then understand my routine and my schedule and what we have to get on the air. And they can respect that I have a job to do too when I'm in there. But that takes time to build. It doesn't happen overnight. So I think there's layers to building that trust in those relationships. And I'm still learning them. I mean, there's guys in there that I feel like I have great relationships with. And there's guys in there that I'm like, I just can't find any connection point with them, you know? And that's going to happen because, we all have different personalities and different interests. But I think if you can just show that respect to them for their time and their routine, and what they have to do every day, then I think that at least you can find the common ground of mutual respect.
You'd mentioned earlier that you had only 1 day of notice to call a Major League Baseball game.
Oh, yeah.
Before we get into that conversation, how do you prepare to be a reporter, to be a host, and then finally a play-by-play?
Yeah. That one was obviously so different because I just had to rely on my
Right.
experience and, what I know and what I do. So now that I've done more games play by play and some college basketball play by play, I can definitely get into my routine with that. But I think it's something you just have to learn. You have to learn through doing it what works best, what doesn't work best. And again, I think it's different for everybody. So for me personally, what I've learned over the course of my last, 15 plus years of doing all this is I think for sideline reporting, the number one thing I go into with it is what are the big stories? I need to know them. But what I'm going to tell aren't the big stories. The play by play team will handle that most likely. And so early on in my preparation for sidelines, you'd be like, oh, I have all these great stories. And you bring them to the producer and they're like, yeah, we're already going to do
Eh.
that. We're going to do that. We're going to do that. Yeah, they don't care. So you have to really dig, on the nuggets that like are interesting, but not for me personally. I always didn't want anything too fluffy or too cheesy because I wanted to be taken seriously about I know sports and I had all those kind of different voices in my head going with it, but I try and just again get the big picture and then find smaller stories, and whether that's through relationship building and you're just chatting up with a guy one day and he might tell you something that happened to him that day that becomes an interesting story, to as far as like researching, and there's a lot of different sites in baseball and football where you can find more information on players called player profiles, kind of digging through those, trying to connect the dots a lot of, I know this pitcher went to UConn and oh my gosh, that guy on the other team went to UConn. Did they play at the same time? Were they teammates? Were they roommates? Like, how can I further that story? So it's a lot about the research and then about following up with the players to try and get more and make meat of it. And then again, for television purposes, for sidelines, elements are huge. Like, can I tell this story and does it need a graphic? Does it need video? Does it need pictures from social media? Like, what does it need to make it shine on a visual medium?
Yeah, and that's where the team process comes in with the producer
Absolutely.
and the director and the other
Absolutely.
announcers and collaboration with that, which sometimes is really simple and sometimes it's like, how the heck are we going to tell this story?
Exactly. Exactly. Um, I think for hosting, it's a lot more stat driven for me during the day. When I wake up, I'm definitely reading a lot. I'm reading about the team. I'm reading about other teams in Major League Baseball, kind of the trends happening, and then it's diving into the matchups for that night, like what's important, who hits this pitcher well, kind of all those things. And then by the time I get into work and we start to look at the rundown and dissect it, then I'm doing a little bit more research just to add on and make sure. But my job as a host is always to set up the analysts and make them shine and make them look good, as well as drive the show and all of our content. So there is preparation, but a lot of it is more doing a dance to like make the producer happy, make the analyst happy, make our sponsors happy, and make the show come all together. So kind of more of a driver real time. And then for play by play, I'm still learning for sure. But
Of
I
course.
think the biggest things for me, and it's different again per sport, for basketball, I've learned my boards become really important. And that would mean like everyone again, it's almost like I spend a lot of time right now learning how to create a sheet that will help my memory while I'm in the game. And every announcer has a different style they like for their board. So I'm just kind of trying to figure out what works best for me. But right now I have an Excel sheet and I go through and I put the entire roster on it and then, some just like stats about them, some weekly stats, what they did in the last game, what their career games have been, and a personal note. And you never know again how the game's going to go and if you're going to have a really good game, a really close game, you might not need a lot of extra information, but if you have kind of a blowout game, you might have more of that storytelling opportunity. So you want to make sure you have enough stories to tell and enough information. So it's a lot more research driven for me right now. And then at shoot arounds, you can get more information from coaches and from players. But for baseball, you can't just prepare for one game, if that makes sense. It's such a build on season that you're collecting information as you go. You're collecting little deposits to put in. And when you're on the air for 3.5 hours, and again, not a lot of action, so to speak, in baseball, there's a lot of time to fill. And
Hmm.
sometimes I'll prepare specifically to fill for that game or that day or a player we're highlighting or time of season it is. But sometimes, as I found, you might be in the seventh inning and it might be super boring. And all of a sudden they put a pinch hitter in from the other team. And as you're saying his name, you recall this great conversation you had with him 2 years ago. And you can start to tell that story. And it's not necessarily something you specifically prepared for that game, but it's just in there. It's a collection of thoughts that's just in there and wanting to make sure that you're always collecting that. I want to be a sponge in this game so bad because there's so many neat and interesting stories to tell and never enough
Hmm.
time to do them. But hopefully that time will come for you eventually throughout the course of a season.
Okay, walk me through the day before you called your first Major League Baseball game, being the first woman to do so in the last 25 years.
Yeah, 25 years it had been since a female had done play by play on television for a baseball game. So, with that, I think it sounds like a long time, but the one Gail Gardner had called a Major League Baseball game. It actually happened to be the Rockies and the Reds on ESPN as a fill in. So, it was kind of a one off 25 years prior to that. And there had been other women that they had tried out for a game here or there in the booth years before that. And Susan Waldman, who I want to give a lot of credit to in this, has been the longtime voice of the Yankees on radio. So Susan's been doing it for a long time. So, to say, you're one of the first and no woman's ever done this, I don't want to say that because I do think there have been women. And honestly, when I stepped in the booth, I think at the time there was at least one, maybe two women at the minor league level calling games. So, nevertheless, I knew there was historical context to it and that might be a big deal because a couple of years prior in 2015, I had the chance to call a series of games on the radio as a fill in,
Hmm.
and that
But that
got
was as a
some
color analyst.
publicity. Yes, as a color analyst. So that got some publicity. So I knew this probably would in that regard, but I had no idea. Like I don't call it naive. I had no idea the amount of attention it would get from a local scale, from a national scale. I just had no idea. So that day before, it was a Sunday. Sundays are pretty laid back at the ballpark, but I remember our producer coming up and our coordinating producer, and they were like, "Hey, Drew needs to take tomorrow off. Like, you're gonna call the game." I was just like, "Wait, what?" And we
Did you think it was a joke?
I didn't because we had talked about it and I had called a game at spring training. So I'd been in the booth and been in that position. And we had been discussing that I was going to be, probably fill in some games. But we had thought originally it might be kind of a full team effort. Like we had our analysts do an all analyst broadcast only, kind of like the NBA is doing, how they have all former NBA players calling games.
Hmm.
So we're like, hey, let's just take this opportunity. Drew Goodman's not going to take that many games off. We can kind of all hands on deck, have fun broadcasts, make them look different, sound different, just try something new. So I knew it might be coming. I really thought I might have some more time to prepare for it
You would have liked to have
than
had that time to practice.
yeah, it would have been great to practice, to prepare. But again, at the same time, it was kind of good. I just had to do it because there was a lot of overthinking that I probably already did in less than 24 hours. I'm sure if I had 2 weeks or a month or whatever it would have been, I probably would have done a lot of overthinking on it. So yeah, I was terrified. I was terrified. I was excited, kind of just all those feels. And again, having such great teammates, not just from the production side, which I'll get into in a minute because there's a whole host of people over there that really kind of set me up for this path. But just our analysts, Jeff Houston, Ryan Spielberg, Corey Sullivan, they for years have really talked to me and brought my confidence to a point where I'm supposed to be doing this. It wasn't just like, oh, we're going to try this and no one knew about it and Jenny's going to be play by play. No, it was like for a couple of years, these guys are like, even with our pre and post game show, they're like, you need to know more. You need to talk more baseball. Like, just as much about this game as we do. And these were conversations that we've been having for years. So I think being able to go back to that confidence bank of just being like, okay, they trust that I'm in this spot. I better start trusting that I'm in this spot. That was super helpful. So that brought on the excitement part. And, they're your teammates. They're pumping you up. Everyone's like getting you ready for it. So when I showed up to the ballpark, though, there were like local news got wind I was doing it. So their cameras started showing up and setting up in our booth. And like, here I am. I don't even know. Like, I have my scorebook like I normally do, but I probably need to write more things in it because I'm calling the day. Like, I'm just trying to figure out my routine of the day of like how I'm going to do play by play. And so it was very overwhelming. And then, that night we went out to celebrate right after, and we're sitting at the bar, and like Scott Van Pelt's Sports Center show comes on, and all of a sudden it's this huge, awful, outdated picture of me that they found on the internet that they're saying the first female to do this in 25 years and celebrating that, which is so awesome. And Billie Jean King is tweeting me,
Oh,
and
wow.
it just kind of was this spiral effect that I had no idea that that kind of attention would be on the horizon. At the same time, I quickly realized that it's so necessary, not because of me, but that attention was out there, that a female voice can call a Major League Baseball game, just like they can call any sport and be involved in this game on any level. And so that's where I started to realize the idea. And this goes full circle back to me seeing Melissa Stark on TV. I really started to see this idea that you have to see it to believe it. And I believed I could do Melissa Stark's job, but I didn't realize there were so many other jobs out there in
Right.
our industry to do because I really didn't see anyone that looked like me doing them. And this will bring me back to my support system. We have a producer, Allison Behill,
Hmm.
who has been producing for a long time. She's been in the game for like 15, 20 years on all different levels, but she became a game producer probably 5 or 6 years ago. And she is our secondary game producer for Major League Baseball. I would I would venture to say she's probably one of, if not the only female producing 50 plus Major League Baseball games a year. But we also have a female director, Erica Ferrero, and she got the full time directing job last year. So on any given day, you can walk into our production truck and see a female front bench, meaning producer director. And we have a couple other females that work in the truck on tape and Chiron and audio. And I might be calling a game. And a
Hmm.
lot of different television crews have commented on that throughout the course of the last couple of years when we're on the road of like, wow, we've never seen so many females in here. And it's crazy to think that we're almost at 2020 and people are still talking about gender roles. But I get it because it's been a male dominated industry. And if you see females, you might see one or two with a traveling party. But to see so many, it again was just this idea that, like, yes, people are seeing that this is normal now. And for that next generation growing up, when they start to think about what do I want to do, they can see it in a lot of different areas. So hopefully that job pool, that career opportunity, those dreams have opened up to the next generation.
Do you notice a difference in what women are able to bring to sports from their perspective, or are they doing what appears to be normal?
I mean, I would hope it's just they are doing what appears to be normal. I think it's a valid question, and we talk about this a lot when we go to visit college classes. I think if you just break down gender roles, there is a softer side of a female, and I think that's where storytelling and even that relationship and those interpersonal relationships that you have to develop in a clubhouse can come into play. I mean, maybe I do get more of a story out of this guy because the way I'm asking questions are different than the way a male is asking questions. But I just hope at the end of the day, it's more about like, I'm here no matter if I'm a woman or a man, and you're there no matter you're a woman or a man, because you have a passion for what you do. And because how you grew up really becomes how you see this game. And for me, again, growing up with a dad as a coach and growing up around the game of baseball specifically, but around sports a lot, it wasn't just my dad. My grandma was a huge sports fan. She was a sports nut. And I often would sit on the couch and watch basketball games with her, or I'd go to a Broncos game with her. So that also was part of my driving experience growing up, and why I wanted to do this. So I do think though diversity is so important, whether it's gender or ethnicity or socioeconomical status, because that means you're bringing a different perspective to the table. And that's exactly what sports are, right? You look
Right.
across the field and you see all different walks of life. And yes, all these guys get paid a ton of money on the professional level to do this, but they all grew up very differently. And now they're coming together and have to have an understanding of each other to become a team to compete at the highest level. And it's the same exact thing in production. We all grew up differently. And what do we bring to the table that is valuable to how we tell stories and how we bring this into other people's homes? And so I just think that diversity is super important. And I think the other thing that's important is when you start to look at the statistics of who our audience is, who's viewing games,
Right.
the woman audience is growing significantly. And I would venture to say, based on some of the numbers I recently looked at, that all major four sports teams have at least a 35 to 40% rating of a female audience. Don't you think that needs to be represented in what you're seeing and who's producing the games then?
No, absolutely. And I feel like I've seen a big trend in seeing women on TV, in sports broadcasting as well. In fact, when I was with Universal Sports, as you know, we brought you on, and
Yeah,
and a
yeah,
big part of my production staff was women.
you're
So
right.
and they were very qualified. It's not like a token type thing. So
And that's it, right? At the end of the day, like that's the respect you want. Is I don't want to be calling games because I'm the only female out there that like, oh, we should do this because she's a female. Like I want to be qualified to call games because feel like I've earned it as a professional. I feel like I've been in this business a long time. I feel like I bring something to the table and I'm good at my craft. That's why I want a job.
right,
I think any woman would say that. They
yeah.
want to be the one that's qualified for the job, not just because they were qualified and some other people were qualified and they're the only woman or the only person of diversity, so they had to get hired. Like that's terrible. I don't want the job then.
And you had mentioned like Susan Waldman,
Yes.
Melissa Stark, some of the women who are on TV right now, Jessica Mendoza,
Yes.
Beth Mowens, Gail Gardner.
Hmm.
How do you feel like being a part of that group
Man,
now? Does it make you feel any different or like you have a responsibility to uphold?
it's crazy. Like those are still really big names to me, even though, I've Jessica Mendoza and I have fostered a relationship. We've talked about being in this business and the importance of a female being in the booth, and we've had great conversations, but I still like I can't believe that I'd be in the same newspaper article as her, or I've talked with Susan Waldman. I can't believe that I have that relationship. Like those those names to me are still just so respected, right? They're women that were pioneers in our business. Leslie Visser, when you look at her career, I got the chance to meet her at an award ceremony recently, and like all I can say to those women is thank you, because they took an opportunity that they were given, and maybe they were given it because they were a female at the time, but what they did with it after became so important for the next generation of women to have something to see, to have something to grow and aspire to be. I on Twitter got to thank Melissa Stark, and she wrote back, and it was just such a cool connection. And I hope she saw that come full circle. I know she has a great impact on a lot of people, but I hope that she knows that she impacted someone so much that they took the opportunity to want to go and impact the next generation too. And it's just kind of this really cool thing to be involved in. But yeah, I don't feel worthy enough to be involved in that group of people. And at the same time, I feel a great obligation as younger girls reach out or I see them at the ball game and stuff to just be a great example that they too can do this and want to be this. And not even for people that want to be sportscasters, but I hope with what we do, again, going back to baseball specifically, we're on 162 games and a lot of people tune in for a lot of those games or tune in and out throughout the course of the summer. They invite us into their homes. And I don't take that lightly. I think it's really cool that people want to listen to us talk about baseball summer or talk about the crazy stories that we do. And it's cool. It's a cool relationship that we get to have with our audience, even though it's kind of one way sometimes. But I hope that I'm shining light, spreading joy, and my passion for sports and what I love, and I hope that comes across to those people.
I think that's one of the things I like about you is you're so genuine and honest, and it comes across on screen, and you have that ability to connect with people to make them feel like they're a part of the sports event that you're covering.
Oh, well, thanks. That means so much. I mean, I feel like you have to be who you are. And it goes back to all those no's or the first guy laughing at me, being like, "Are you really going to do this?" Like, of course, there were times that I thought, should I change my look? Should I change my voice? Should I change the way I'm doing a story? Should I be more serious? Should I be more funny? Like, at the end of the day, all you can do is be you. And I tell people that are aspiring broadcasters this all the time, like, watch Sports Center, watch games, take notes about broadcasters, what you like, what you don't like. But at the end of the day, you can take a collection of those things, but don't be those things if you're not. If you're not naturally funny, don't try to be funny. Like, it's not going to work for your shtick. But you have to, at the end of the day, the only thing that you can bring that no one else can bring is the fact that you're you. You're individual, you're unique, and you have to bring that to the table. And I think, again, through just experience, through trial and error, I finally came to a place where I was comfortable enough saying that, like, this is an entertainment form, this is a craft. People are going to like it and people are not going to like it, and I don't have to be everyone's friend or everyone's favorite announcer, but like, all I can be is me, and I'll feel most comfortable with myself at the end of the day.
All right, before I let you go, I have a couple of quick questions.
Yes, is this like a fired off round for a
Not
prize?
necessarily. You can, elaborate on the answer a little bit. Having been a reporter
Yes.
and on camera, of course, you don't want to make yourself the story
Right.
when you're reporting or when you're doing things like that. As a broadcaster, we don't want to do that. But you were on the opposite side. How did that feel?
It was so uncomfortable to be interviewed. I was like, "Oh, this is how people feel when I interview them." But at the same time, again, becoming the subject, so to speak, I knew I had a platform and I had to take advantage of that, and I had to allow myself to relish in that because the message was so much greater, right? It was about representation, it was about following your dreams, it was about being yourself, and I had to embrace it. And I tried to be as comfortable as I could in that. But I think, again, at the end of the day, when you're passionate about something, you just have to wear it, so to speak. And that's what I tell athletes all the time that don't like to be interviewed or don't want to be on camera. Once you become comfortable or cool enough with them, like, I feel like I do have that conversation with a lot of Rockies players. Of like, hey, listen, and even some big name players, which I won't mention here, but I've had to have that conversation with them of like, listen, I know this is uncomfortable for you, but you believe in what you're doing and you're the only person that can tell your message. Like, if we don't interview you, we can sit here and speculate how hard you work or speculate what you do, but
Yes.
only you can tell your own truth. And it's really interesting to see guys' reaction to that and how they embrace that. And some over embrace it, right? Like, we see these athletes that are on social media and like they want to put themselves out there all the time. And we see guys that just like don't want to talk on a camera and avoid it at all costs. And all of a sudden have a new workout plan after a game because they know if they go into the weight room, the media won't have time to talk to them before their deadline.
Yeah.
So it's funny to see the reaction to it. But I think when they understand that they're the only people that really can shed light on their truth, then that becomes important to them and then they make time to do it. So I felt like in that moment, in that time, the message, the truth was greater than, any being uncomfortable with being in the spotlight.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And, when we sit athletes down to interview them, we do have to have some conversations like that,
Yeah,
which sometimes go well and sometimes they clam up even more.
right.
So knowing that you've given them advice on how to tell their story or be a part of what we're trying to accomplish as broadcasters, what's the best piece of advice you've gotten in this industry?
I think it's the P's. It's have a passion for what you do and it's be prepared. I mean, you can never be prepared enough for being on television, being a person that gives information. Again, I think it's 90% of what we do you don't see on camera, and that becomes the most important thing. What you read, what information you're gathering, the relationships you build. And that's my third important thing is just relationships. Make sure not only with the athletes you're covering that you're working and focusing on those relationships, but with the people that you work with. You and I both know this business is so small at the end of the day, and how you treat people becomes so important. It's not about just treating the people that can
Mm-hmm.
make you look good or treating the people that can give you a better job grade. It's about treating everyone equally and with respect because, as we mentioned before, we all have a job to do. And when everyone does that job great, that's what makes a great production. So just understanding the difficulties of everyone else's job day to day and being respectful of that and making sure you learn names in this business and learn about people, because at the end of the day, I think when you treat people great, that that just makes everyone's day better.
What about people who maybe are watching a game that are listening to this, and is there anything that you can let them know what it's like working on the other side, on the broadcast side, that maybe they don't know or that you'd like them to know?
Yeah, it's pure chaos. Like, we hope you don't know that. We hope what you're watching is smooth and pretty and comes across great, but on the backseat, it's just total chaos. You're doing live television, anything can happen. And as much as we prepare, there's some things that are happening that you just have to go with. I mean, there might be a story that comes up in the ballpark that you didn't read about, or you didn't prepare for, but now it's in front of your face and your producer's telling you to take a microphone down there and go interview this person that you know nothing about, and you're on your phone doing quick research because you want to make sure it sounds good. Or you're interviewing someone, and what you can see at home is us on camera being interviewed. What you can't see is like all the people standing behind the camera making crazy faces at you or yelling at you or trying to distract you. And then what I always tell people who enjoy watching sports on TV, if you ever get the opportunity, for some reason, if someone in television production invites you to come watch a game in a TV truck, take it because it will be the most like stressful, chaotic minutes of your life. Don't you think? For people that have never been in a TV truck?
I love inviting people into the TV truck because they have a different perspective. Like,
Yeah.
what the heck just happened here?
Well, like, you walk in and visually there's so many monitors because you're getting every angle of a camera, you're getting replays, whatever. There's 20 to 50 monitors given on any TV truck. So visually you're overwhelmed right away. Then there's like the huge tech board, which has all these numbers and colors. And like that thing still overwhelms me looking at it. And I was like, who works this? Who knows how to operate this? And all the different machines. And then once the game's going, if you're sitting in there, all of the chaos and the yelling and the communication styles,
Yeah.
and people are having to just like decipher what's for them and what's not for them. It's pure chaos. But you're right. I think for us in TV, that's the question I always get being on air is like, how do you talk when someone's talking in your ear? And it's like, what you don't know is like a producer's never just gonna like talk in your ear while you're trying to do this full blown thing. But yeah, that dance of like having to divide your brain and like consume information that you, the producer's telling me, versus like continue to talk and articulate and have a camera ready face and presence without looking confused because I have a voice in my ear. Like it's a skill you just have to learn. And I forget that it's kind of nothing to me now, but I get why people are so blown away that that's something you have to do.
What's the most challenging broadcast you've ever had?
Oh man, that's a good
Like
question.
something technical that's gone wrong and that you've had to battle through, or maybe a breaking news, or
Oh, gosh, I mean, we do so many games every summer. There should be something that would stick out here, but I can't think of anything off the
they
top of my head.
kind of roll into each other.
They really do. I'm like, it's kind of one big lump of a season. That one game I was telling you about, my first college football game, when my audio didn't work and I couldn't find an audio person, and the producer was asking me to do a whole bunch of things, and I had no way to communicate
And it was your
to
first
him.
broadcast.
Yeah, it was my first broadcast, and you wanna put your best foot forward and show people you're willing and able to do anything, and, like, here I am, and I can't communicate with anybody, and that to me
Yeah.
just felt like my lifeline was cut off.
Well, Jenny, I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you being on this podcast with me. Just a brief story on how we got to know each other. You coming in with Universal Sports Network and
Yeah,
talking with us about hosting the Countdown to Sochi show. And just in our conversation that we had family friends that were in common from my hometown in Grand Junction. And and just knowing the contacts that you've had with the Padres that I had contacts with, it's a small industry, like you said, and it's a rewarding one, I
It
think.
really is. It really is. And I'm so glad that you had me in the podcast. It was a lot of fun. And thank you for letting me walk down memory lane a little bit. And thank you for giving me a job at some point in my life. I'd never have formally done that. So what a great platform to do that on.
All right, that was Jenny Cavnar, a good friend of mine. And for me, I love finding out about my colleagues' journeys and how they've made an impact or have been influential in the respective sport. And if you have a chance to listen to her, you can catch Jenny on all Colorado Rockies games this season as the pre- and post-game host, as well as the fill-in play-by-play and field reporter. Jenny Cavnar is a great person. She does a great job with the Rockies. And by the way, she's continuing her baseball lineage by naming her firstborn son Vincent, they call him Vin, after the great Dodgers Hall of Fame announcer, Vin Scully. If you like this episode, be sure to like it and share it on your social media channels, and positive reviews are appreciated. Also, be sure to subscribe to Sports in the Making so you don't miss out on more episodes. If there's something that you would like to know more of in sports, drop me a line on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. You can also visit sportsinthemaking.com to catch up on previous episodes. On the next episode of Sports in the Making, I'll talk with Paul Kirk, former director of media relations for the Denver Broncos during their back-to-back Super Bowl championship seasons. We'll revisit what it was like for him during those years and find out what he currently does as Associate Athletic Director for Strategic Communications with University of Utah Athletics. I'm your host, Don Cardona. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making.